Saman, a word in Hindi literally translating to honor, is the name of a 2-week-long awareness program for crime against women. This has led to the creation of new policies in several states across India, including one that requires any woman moving outside of her house for work to register with her local police station so that she can be tracked. Another explains that AI-enabled cameras will watch her face for signs of distress without her consent, all in the name of ensuring her own safety. The Wire of March 5, 2021 explains that these policies have convoluted honor with the purity of women, putting them on a pedestal but at the expense of their agency and independence. This phenomenon is known as benevolent sexism, which is not unique to any law, policy, or country. Defined by Liz Plank in her 2019 book For the Love of Men, benevolent sexism, or BS, is when someone advances a favorable attitude towards women, but it's actually based in sexism. The logic is rooted in an inequality that women require protection for men, but the result appears to be preferential treatment for women. It can be as serious as laws limiting women's freedom or as simple as a man insisting to walk on the side nearest to the street. But if gone unchecked, BS just maintains power structures that only benefit men and that perpetuate negative stereotypes on women that ultimately hold them back in the long run. India's new regulations may appear to be promoting women's rights, but actually limits them in regards to freedom of choice and movement. That's what benevolent sexism is, a negotiation where women are offered certain sympathies and protections, but in return are granted fewer opportunities and rights. So today, we'll be learning to identify and understand benevolent sexism through discussing where the term comes from, modern manifestations, and finally implications of what Plank describes as misogyny, with a wink. A frequent example of benevolent sexism was pervasive in the 2016 election when male politicians utilized the phrase mothers and daughters to convey why men shouldn't be sexist. The Daily Dot of January 17, 2017 explains, instead of simply standing up for women because they deserve to be treated equally, men who evoke mothers and daughters are positioning themselves to matter only in relation to them. These stereotypes are the basis of benevolent sexism, which leads us to discussing where the term comes from. Scientific American of April 2, 2013 explains that the coin was termed in 1996 by Peter Glick and Suzanne Fiske when they were writing a paper on ambivalent sexism, noting that there are actually two different types of sexist attitudes and behaviors. Hostile sexism is what most people think of when they hear the term sexist. Angry, explicitly negative attitudes towards women. But benevolent sexism is defined as a set of interrelated attitudes towards women that are sexist in terms of viewing them stereotypically and in restricted roles, but that are ultimately positive in feeling and in tone. Glick and Fiske discovered that benevolent sexism was also a significant predictor of nationwide gender inequality. In countries where men were more likely to endorse benevolent sexism, men also lived longer, were more educated, had higher literacy rates, and made significantly more money. On the quite popular Reddit page entitled, "Am I the Asshole?", one user expressed feelings of guilt over not enjoying chivalrous acts. She explained that she had to ask her boyfriend to stop sending her flowers to her work because it made her feel embarrassed and unprofessional. Oftentimes, acts like these are actually BS and not a pure act of kindness. Sending a woman flowers to publicly, whether consciously or not, can be a way for a man to mark his territory and can be rooted in the sexist mentality that a woman is your property to take care of. Modern benevolent sexism shows itself in all spheres of our lives, but two of the most common modern manifestations impact women in dating and at work. First, let's discuss how benevolent sexism impacts us during dating, and especially within straight relationships. BS while dating includes things like a man insisting to hold the door open, always ordering for his girlfriend, or showering her with gifts that she doesn't actually want. Forbes of February 12, 2020 explains how traditional ideals of chivalry have held back both women and men. For example, it's still typically the man that's expected to foot the bill. In a survey, they found that 78% of all respondents and 85% of men said that they think a man should pay for the first date. On the surface, chivalrous acts seem beneficial to women, so women have little motivation to call for change. There are immediate rewards from accepting chivalrous favors from men, and not only do those who decline men's help miss out on the free meal, but they also may be perceived as cold or not appreciative of the gesture. Second, benevolent sexism impacts a woman's career aspirations. The researchers found that just like hostile sexism, BS negatively influences a woman's success and well-being. BS at work looks like your male colleagues treating you differently, giving you different tasks, or giving you feedback on your ability to be a likable team player instead of an effective performer. Psychology Today of January 15th, 2020 highlights that research got fewer questions correct on a problem-solving test when the tester expressed BS attitudes towards them, and their impaired performance created self-doubt about their competence. The research stated that those feelings could become the difference between a young girl walking out of a math exam with an 80%, believing that she is not cut out for a career in STEM and not signing up for the next level course. The findings suggest that if women are receiving BS feedback, even if it is consciously well-intentioned, they may nonetheless feel like they cannot meet the demands of the field. Benevolent sexism holds women back both by altering women's perceptions of themselves, but also by limiting their opportunities. We must cut the BS. It has the capability of turning serious and even deadly, which we witnessed when Dylan Roof took 9 lives in the historical African American church in Charleston, South Carolina. The Conversation of June 19, 2015 describes how the killer was a lethal gentleman who, while committing the act, proclaimed, "I have to do it. You rape our women and you're taking over our country." Roof's act was motivated by racism first and foremost, but also by benevolent sexism. Roof believed that his behavior was justified because he felt called to defend women who he thought were too fragile to do so themselves. Which is why we must recognize that while BS affects us all, it does not affect us all equally, leading us to 2 implications: relationship satisfaction and racial violence. Initially, BS gets in the way of healthy relationships. One study from the University of Auckland found that women that hold benevolent sexism views themselves had lower marital satisfaction. In the aforementioned book by Liz Blank, she explains that when women think that they need to be protected, cherished, and treated like a princess, it increases their likelihood to view any type of conflict with their male partner as violating that worldview. Any disagreement or criticism, which is normal in any healthy relationship, is perceived as uncalled for. Luckily, the Washington Blade of March 21st, 2020 highlights that research has found a potential solution. Stop dating men. Data shows that same-sex relationships, in particular relationships of lesbians, are generally happier than straight couples due to having more egalitarian relationships. Obviously, I realize that sexuality is not a choice, but there are clearly lessons that we can learn from relationships that are not bound by gendered norms. When we decide roles based on personality traits and genuine desires and leave the BS behind, we are all happier for it. Additionally, the sympathies that BS often extend are not afforded to women of color, which leads us to our second implication: racial violence. Side post of July 4th, 2021 explains that Black women are marginalized both in terms of their race and gender. Side post continues that this explains new research that has shown Black women are less likely than their white counterparts to be afforded the protections that can often come with perceptions of femininity and BS. This in turn can make police violence towards Black women seem more justifiable to participants who expressed high levels of BS. Today, we learn to identify and understand benevolent sexism through discussing where the term comes from, its modern manifestations, and finally, implications. I want to be clear that doing most of these acts, like holding the door open or picking up a tab, are not inherently bad things and can be really nice when it's something done for everyone, to be nice, instead of something that's done only for women because they're women.